Excellent. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and those out in the back, hello. I know we have some folks watching on video. So we have just an hour together, which is not a whole lot of time when it comes to the science and the research and the personal issues about having difficult conversations. And as we know right now in our world, and as has been seen in history, the need for conversations, I would say almost more than ever, is really critical, and within our military force for sure. So we're going to jump in, and because there's not a lot of time, I usually like to get to know the audience. If you're a good instructor, a good facilitator, you need to know some stuff about the audience to be able to maneuver the materials to fit into your life. And so because we don't have a lot of time, I start out with a roll call, and I do this with all audiences, whether it's our first term or our cadets that just come in at 17, 18, or whether it's the generals that I speak with. And so my daughters, they'll say that I interrogate people. I want to know like where you're from and what's your dog's name and what are you going to do when you grow up and all of that kind of stuff. And so for this roll call, if you will yell out, so you're just going to yell out, "Oh yeah," if this is true. So give me an "oh yeah" if you are a leader in the Army. Ah, interesting. Okay, give me an "oh yeah" if you serve in the Army. Okay, so I'm in the right place. That's good. Give me an "oh yeah" if you grew up as a military brat. Nice. Thank you for your service as a child. That's a lot of service. Give me an "oh yeah" if you're raising your own military brats. Oh, nice, excellent. And that was like a positive "oh yeah." Sometimes the audience is like, "oh yeah," because that's difficult. Give me an "oh yeah" if you are a cat person, not a dog person. None, no cat people. Okay, good to know. Give me an "oh yeah" if when you were in high school, and some of you that was not very long ago it looks like, but for me I have to think way back. When you were in high school, so give me an "oh yeah" if when you were in high school you knew what you would be doing with your life today. Oh yeah. Nice, excellent. Living your dream and having that vision. Great, thank you. Give me an "oh yeah" if it is important for you to protect your friends, your family, and the soldiers that you serve with. Okay, so that should have been everyone, hopefully, right? And so that really is what we're going to talk about. And I'll present a little bit of information about myself. So I share this picture to show that I did grow up as a military brat, as you can see from the name tape behind me. That, yes, at one time it was, oh, how cute, right? That I was little and cute. I also share this to show that the name that I have was inherited. It was a tough name to grow up with, absolutely. But even when I had the chance to change it, I didn't because of the amazing man that my father was. And so I share that he was a military soldier, but that even more important for me personally was that he was the man who set the standard about what men and women should be and can be and how we respect dignity of all people. And so you see that I grew up in the military and then as an adult worked most of my life either with the Army or with the Air Force. And even though I wear blue today, Air Force blue, my heart really is with Army because of my father, and then met my partner as he served in the Army as well. And so, and then my brother, he serves in the Navy. So we're like a military family for sure. So that's a little bit of my personal background and my commitment and my dedication to this family, the military family, that is my family. Absolutely, figuratively, literally, as an adult and as we raise some military brats as well. My background professionally is in education, and so I've done some degrees in education, but then also in mental health counseling and counseling in general. I have worked for about 11 years in the SAPR program, the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Program, and before coming to Colorado almost 5 years ago, worked at the Pentagon for the Air Force in terms of developing curriculum and lessons when it comes to sexual assault prevention. And so with my focus on prevention science, and there is a science of prevention of sexual assault, so we know there is research and data about how we stop sexual violence. That is not the focus today, but to give that to you to say your SHARP people are really knowledgeable in that. So as you move into more of a leadership role, to understand that there is science behind prevention and how do we stop violence against others, interpersonal violence, Not military focus, not the world global issue, but in terms of interpersonal violence, that there is science behind that. And one of the pieces of science in terms of prevention, and this is prevention of perpetration, not prevention of being a victim. So this is not risk reduction of watch or drink and, have a plan, and it's not that. This is the science behind perpetration, the risk of someone becoming a perpetrator. So one of the risk factors of perpetration in a culture, so not an individual, what's going on with this individual that he or she would then perpetrate, but in a culture, in a community, is discrimination. So when there is discrimination, when there is racism, when there is sexism, when there is homophobia, we know that in that culture there is a higher rate of perpetration of sexual violence. And so that's the connection today in terms of SHARP and sexual assault and that topic, and in terms of having difficult discussions. Because if you as a leader and a member in your community and your family allow for any type of discrimination, you will find more sexual violence in your community. Research, data, you want some numbers, I'm happy to share afterwards. You have my name, you can find me. Ms. Kimball is also, she has my contact if you want more data and information. So a lot of times people will say, well, Kimberly, you're like this feminist, out there person who cares about everything, the trees, the earth, discrimination and race and LGBT, like you just are that soft liberal person that cares about all of this. And I say absolutely, because it is all connected. That if you allow for any type of discrimination in your unit, then you are increasing probability. And so I am saying you are, so there's some responsibility and ownership in this. Your leaders are increasing the probability of sexual violence. So that's where the connect is today, and that's what we're going to talk about. And so for today, what you need is 5 of the sticky notes. So if you haven't received it, then please make sure you pass it around. There should still be enough, hopefully. If not, you can take notes on your phone. You can, if you have paper, you can just do that when we get to that point. But eventually we'll get to that. So I'm going to give you a caution here up front that when we talk about prevention, when we talk about racism, when we talk about homophobia, it is not okay to not use accurate terms. It is not. When I talk about sexual assault and sexual violence, it doesn't help that I really soft foot around the topic, because I don't want to hurt people's feelings, or I don't want them to go, wow, she said penis and she said anal penetration. You cannot talk about these issues without being real with the topic. And so I give you that caution up front. It may be uncomfortable to sit here. Having difficult conversations becomes uncomfortable because it makes us look within ourselves in terms of what's our role, what have I done, what can I do, and that is not comfortable for us. We often present a facade. All of us do. Me included. Right now you see this, you don't know all that's back here. You don't. Because in sociology, we know that we present facades. We act this way when you put on your uniform, you come to work, your boss is around the corner, you're going to act a certain way. You put on this clothes, you go to church, you're going to act a certain way. You're home with your buddies watching football, you're going to act a certain way. You're home with mom and grandma, there's a different persona. So we put on different personas. That is absolutely normal, it is part of being human. And so as we look at difficult conversations about believing victims, about discrimination, about sexism, about bias, about any of those topics, it will become uncomfortable. So I'm going to give that to you up front. I even thought, okay, after I do this presentation, I may be never invited back to Fort Carson because it makes people uncomfortable, but that's okay. That is what difficult conversations do. And so as you become uncomfortable, think about why. Where is that coming from? And defenses might come up. Take a look at those defenses. Why? Why is that here? She just said this. What does that mean about me and what I'm feeling right now? I welcome that. I also welcome you to have that conversation. That roll call in the beginning really is for me to see who's in the audience, but it's also to warm you up, to warm up your voice. Because when it comes to these issues that I'll touch on, and really we could dive into each of these in a whole semester. So I'm developing a class at the Academy about gender intersectionality and leadership. And that is a whole semester class. I teach a class on human sexuality. It's a whole semester class. And so to have me come and just talk within an hour, I'll tell you I'm just touching on these topics. But as I do that, if you have questions, comments, and even folks in the back, I'm going to welcome you. I know that Angela has a microphone to come in and say your comments, questions, challenges. Challenge me. This is the place to do that. Difficult conversations, welcome those challenges. And at the very end, I'll make sure to save some time so we have time for those comments and questions. All right. So let's jump in terms of how to start and how to have these difficult conversations or challenging conversations, and I'll say needed conversations. And I'll start out with some research by Brené Brown. She is pretty popular right now in social media and just in the world. And she is a researcher and a professor out of the University of Houston, out of Texas. And her latest book is about daring leadership. And in that book, what she did to gather the data and the research behind it, she went to Fortune 500 corporations like Google, like NASA. NASA's not Fortune 500, but she went to NASA, she went to the military, and she asked leaders, like, how do you do this? How do you do leadership? And who's going to be standing in 5 years as leaders? And for even leaders, it was difficult for them to define leadership and how to do leadership. And I saw on your stickies, I saw a little bit in the back that you had a discussion this morning about that. And so it's not an uncommon conversation. But when leaders are asked, how do you define leadership, it is difficult to do. And when they're asked, well, how do you develop it, it also is difficult. A lot of times they say it's innate, you just have it and you develop it because you watch people and so on. And that really, as humans, when things are difficult to define and put in a box, a lot of times we say what it's not. So if I say, how do you define love? It is much easier for us to define and describe when we had heartbreak. If I say, how do you define belonging? Like, do you really belong in your unit? Do you really have a sense of belonging with the military? It is easier for us to say when we were excluded or when we were discriminated against. It's easier to have those conversations. And what Dr. Brown found was the same with top, amazing, producing leaders, that it was hard for them to define that. But when she did the qualitative, is when you get the stories, so she did qualitative analysis, and what she found at the end with all of these thousands of pieces of data is two things. One, she said, these leaders said that we need to have courageous cultures, and that leaders need to be brave within those cultures by having these conversations. And so it really is right now in our space and time that we live, and you live in your uniform, it is about how do you help create courageous cultures? And how do you become brave to have those conversations? That really was the bottom line of this book. And so I'm going to use that as a platform to talk about how you do this within your workplace, within your family, within your friends. So a few things here, 3 points about the heart of daring leadership. The very first is that you cannot be courageous without rumbling with vulnerability. There is no courage. I don't care if you're going to war. I don't care if you're saying, I love you for the first time to someone. It doesn't matter what it is. There is no courage without being vulnerable. So this is not about the army up here. This is about you as a person. There is no courage. You cannot be brave. And remember, the data behind daring leaders is that we need to have courageous leaders that develop courageous cultures. You as a person cannot be courageous unless you're willing to be vulnerable. You cannot have these conversations about race and gender and sexual orientation and sexual assault, sexual harassment. You cannot have those conversations without being willing to be vulnerable, without putting yourself at risk. You can't. So I don't know what you heard about coming today, but I will tell you, you are not going to leave today saying, here's the simple answer. You're going to leave today saying, wait a minute, this woman just said that this is going to be hard, and it's always hard, and there is no easy answer. So that really is the bottom line. When it comes to courageous conversations and leading families and teams, there is nothing that's simple about this. It is about being vulnerable. And you see the quote there, "Embrace the suck," that Brene Brown took away from her time working with the Army and learning some of the lingo there. It really is about, this isn't easy, it's going to suck, but it's needed if you're going to be that courageous leader, that brave leader. The second point here is about self-awareness and self-love. And then I know sometimes at this point people in the audience go, oh, here comes the fluffy stuff that she's going to talk about self-love. But really it's about when you have the courage to have difficult conversations, it will expose some things about yourself that you may not want to see, that you didn't know existed, that you might know but don't want to show. Okay, I talked about that briefly previously. It will expose that. And I am not saying for you white people, I'm not saying for you people of color, I am saying for us as humans. We all do this. We all present this persona. We all have biases. We all have quick shortcuts that we make in this world. We all do that. Because if you think about right now, there is so much data coming into your brain. So we look at brain science and they say really throughout the course of your day, thousands of pieces of data that pass by you. And your brain has to analyze it, make sense of it, or discard it really, really quickly. Like if you had to sit here thinking, oh, that seat on the bottom of my bottom is really uncomfortable. Oh, the back of my chair, if it's not feeling very good. Or, oh man, that fan, because now you can hear it. That fan, it's distracting me from her voice, right? Oh, her voice, it's just too annoying and high and fast and slow down. And like if you had to do all that all day long, and then you're like, oh yeah, I saw Angela before. I met her. Where did I meet her? Was that the commissary? If you do that, you don't have time to get your stuff done or to even live, right? And so what happens with our brain is we take shortcuts. We make mental shortcuts because it helps save energy. It allows us to focus. It allows us to live because there's all this data coming in. These shortcuts are biases. They are biases, especially when it comes to groups of people, when it comes to organizations, when it comes to even certain things. We create biases, all of us, regardless of color, race, background, all of us, because it's a human process of staying alive. It is. Way back when, we had to make shortcuts so that we could stay alive. So we all have biases. Some biases are very, very accurate and very true. Like I have biases of people in uniform, in military uniform, and that comes from being raised by someone in that comes from being a spouse of, that comes from working with, a sister of, and so on. I have this bias of people in uniform. Some of the biases are very true, in general, about a group of people who wear uniform. And some of my biases are not true. And whether it's more positive than maybe it would really show if I knew you all, or if it was more negative if I knew you all. We all have biases, and as we have conversations, as we invite others to join us in conversations, we will reveal some stuff about ourselves. I will share that really working in sexual violence prevention for all this time, really working on gender and intersectionality and women's rights and sexism, that there's many different ways to evaluate yourself. And so I took an implicit bias, implicit meaning that it's kind of automatic bias. I took an implicit bias test about gender. And the results that are printed on the screen showed that I have bias against women. Not extreme, just a little, but when I took the test, I thought, I work in this field, I'm a feminist, I work on sexism, there's no way I have bias, and after I put in all my data, the numbers come up and it shows, yes, you have this kind of bias with women, against women. Which makes sense, because I grew up in this culture that sent me messages constantly about women and what women are supposed to do and how they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to act, that it makes sense that I would have bias against women. And we know that with people of color who may have biased against people in their own communities, of their same color, of their same background. And so it is not uncommon for us to have biases that we don't know. And because of that, self-compassion is really important as you go through this work. that as you start having these conversations, as you start realizing different parts about yourself, to have that self-compassion, to have some self-awareness. And it is important to know that who you are is how you lead. A lot of times young people will say, well, when I am in this role, I act like this, but when I'm at home, I act like this. That really what we know is who you are is consistent across all the environments that you live in. So to say, well, I can talk like this and use this language here, it's not going to affect me here, it absolutely does. Even though you're going to use your hand to keep that down, like I don't use that language at work because I have bosses and I'm in the uniform, we have our codes and so on. I'm not going to use that language at work, but I'm telling you it impacts our behavior externally. It does. And there's many pieces of data out there about that. I'll share a couple. One is that when they used to do orchestra auditions, they would have, of course, the person up here, they have their violin, and they'd audition, and you are the judges. And what they found was that even under 10% of the major city orchestras were women, that they were not making the cut to make it onto the team, the orchestra, right? They didn't make the cut. Which people could say, well, women just aren't talented in playing those instruments. But interestingly, what they did, if you were the judges, now they put up a screen. So now they have a screen and you can't see me. Even they took into account that you would take off your shoes, like you'd walk out in socks. Because if you hear the tapping of high heels, you already know the gender. And so when they did auditions that way, so I'm behind a screen and I'm playing my violin, that in many major city orchestras, up to 50% now had women on their orchestras by those blind auditions. Just by seeing someone's gender, we automatically have assumptions. Here's another one, another study, that they had two resumes. And one resume, both resumes were exactly the same. One resume has Bob Jones, and the other resume has Brenda Jones. And they give it to you as people who are going to hire for this next position. And having those names on the resumes impacted the hiring of, oh, this person's not as qualified, this person is more qualified, even though it was the same resume, and you probably can guess that women were seen as less qualified because of the name on the resume. That I know in the military they used to put pictures with promotions, and I know at one point, and I'm not sure where they're at now in the different services, but many services do not include the pictures anymore because of that potential bias. One final one. They did apartment applications that you could apply for an apartment, and when they put in all the same background, like here's my job, my income, how long I've lived in this place, here's my credit score, all of that the same. But when the name on the resume was reflective of someone of color, whether it was Hispanic, Black, African American, so you could really tell from the name on the resume that those resumes, and particularly those who had names that reflected the Black community, that those folks were not chosen for empty apartments. So we do that constantly. Who we are is how we lead. And it comes out whether we know it or whether we don't. It is better if we know it, obviously, but there's a lot that we don't know or acknowledge that is implicit or unconscious that impacts our behavior. Okay, and then finally, that courage is contagious. That as leaders, and I know there was some kind of uncertainty of if you call yourself a leader, but I will share that anyone in uniform is a leader, absolutely. People watch you, they emulate you, your peers, as well as you start up the ranks, you are absolutely a leader. As a leader, that when you are courageous, other people join in. Right? Pluralistic ignorance is like, I'm not going to do that, but as soon as one person does it, it's amazing how many people start jumping in. And so starting tough conversations becomes contagious. Doesn't become easy. It's not going to be easy, but it becomes contagious. So you can't get to courage without rumbling with vulnerability, regardless of where you're at. So vulnerability, the definition is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Uncertainty, I'm not sure what's going to come up. If I start this conversation in my workplace about blaming victims, about rape culture, I'm not sure where you stand. But I am going to start this conversation and see, but there's no definitive outcome. I can't say that people aren't going to attack me, talk about me afterwards. I can't say that. It's uncertain. There is risk. There is risk that I will lose friends. If I post this on Facebook, that people will unfriend me because I've now made a stance about this issue, whatever that issue is. Whatever is on fire in your soul now, making a stance about that, there is risk that you will offend people, that you will not have people agree with you, that you will have people not only not be your friend, but now stop being your relative in terms of some of these conversations. And then finally, emotional exposure. That you cannot, as a human, go through life without being emotionally exposed. You cannot. If you live, and definitely if you love, you will experience heartbreak, grief, loss. That is a part of being human. That is a part of vulnerability. So vulnerability is going on the first date after your divorce. Vulnerability is trying to have a child, trying to get pregnant after several miscarriages. Vulnerability is the person that says, I love you first, right? You're in a relationship and do I say it? Do I wait for them to say it? It's the person who says that first is being vulnerable. Vulnerability is watching your father die from a terminal disease. Vulnerability is going for that job, trying out and auditioning. Those are all positions of vulnerability. That it is about emotional exposure, emotional uncertainty, and risk. That as humans, we will be vulnerable throughout life, and to create courageous cultures, it requires vulnerability. All right, so here's a few things that get in the way of courage, and I'll go through some of them really quickly, and I'll stop at the critical ones, at least in terms of our conversation. And the very first one is tough conversations. That when someone has a statement that blames victims, well, she should have known. Well, why'd she go to his room? Well, her dress was like this, her shirt was like this. That when someone makes that comment, that we, in order to address that, for many people, not all people, some people jump in and they're all in, right? But for many people, it takes an act of courage, especially if it's a supervisor, especially if it's someone maybe that you don't know, or someone that is a really close friend. Are you going to risk that? So having tough conversations requires courage, and which means that we will be vulnerable. Remember emotional risk, or emotional exposure and risk. That if we do not deal with fears and feelings, that if we are only dealing with what we see in front of us, then we are going to repeat and have to deal with the same thing over and over again. If you do not deal with people's fears and feelings, then you're going to deal with the same stuff repeatedly. So if some of you supervise, you know that you probably spend most of your time on the very few number of people, because they're the ones who constantly have to be readdressed or get in trouble or bring up issues, and that if you don't deal with what's behind that. So a lot of times if I'm acting like this, there's something else behind that, right? The fears and the feelings. Trust, it sounds like you had some conversations earlier about trust, but the importance of building trust within your unit, within your squadron. Being stuck in setbacks, meaning that if I've made a mistake before, that keeps being brought up, right? And we see that a lot in relationships. That, 4 years ago you did this, or last week you did this, and someone who constantly brings that up. It really erodes courage, it really erodes trust, it erodes the ability to develop a courageous family or a courageous culture. When we have a lack of innovation, and the exercise we're going to do in a minute will talk to that if you do not allow people to be whole with all of their different identities in your unit, in your workplace, then you are not going to have innovation. You will not have people who are safe enough to be trusted, to trust you, to be able to think outside the box and to do anything that's outside of what is just status quo now. So innovation is stifled when you do not have courageous cultures and you do not have these critical conversations. Problem solving and action bias means that we really operate, and many corporations and companies and organizations operate on action. I want this done, I want it done now. And interestingly, Einstein says that if I have a problem, I would spend 90% of my time really defining the problem and only 10% of my time doing something about it. And yet, how often we just jump on, what's the solution, right? You get before your commander and they ask, what are you gonna do? And we really focus on, here's what the action is, versus let's step back and really look at what that problem is. What is it we're trying to solve? How do we define it? And when we don't spend time doing that, we find that we're addressing it again. 6 weeks later, 1 year later, it's that same problem keeps coming up. Brene Brown, in a meeting with her staff one time when she was leaving, and I told you she's from Texas, and not all Texans talk like this, but she definitely has a mouth like this. And when she's leaving, she's like, I want this shit fixed. And as she's leaving the office, she hears someone in the back saying, what shit are we talking about, right? Like, we don't spend time defining what is that problem. And so those of you who do live with a family or you have your own children, thinking about what's the problem, not just what the solution is. That's the point there. And then really the point of these difficult conversations is the fourth from the bottom about inclusivity, diversity, and equity. That if you are not having conversations about inclusivity, about people belonging, about equity and equality, about bias, if you are not having those in your units, and even if you are not the leader of your unit, the importance of understanding why that's needed in terms of innovation, in terms of trust, in terms of not just solving problems, but getting to the root of problems. If you are not having conversations about inclusivity, diversity, and equity in your personal life, the first thing I'll say is that you're quite privileged to not have to have those conversations. That when you have a choice in having those conversations, it absolutely shows that you have a comfort of not having to have those. Because other people don't have choice. That absolutely is about their existence and their life and their experience. And that just because you don't have to have those conversations does not mean you should not. And if you want to be that courageous leader, if you want courageous cultures, if you want innovation, and if you want your team to be as optimal in terms of your outcome and your mission, if you want it to be as optimal as it can be, then you're going to have those conversations. And remember I said at the very, very beginning, they are not easy. So you have to be vulnerable to have the courage to have those conversations. Shame and blame, that when we blame others, and especially in units that shame, then we absolutely are not developing courageous units. That shame, in your unit, this is what shame looks like. It's gossip. So in your unit, do you have gossip? That's a sign of shame. Do you have the meeting after the meeting? So you have your meeting, and then when you leave, you have your separate meeting. Can you believe? And even though in the main meeting, you're like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And then afterwards, can you believe that that's what they want? What are they thinking? Right? That's a sign of shame. When you do not talk directly to someone, but you talk about them, that's a sign of shame. And a lot of times people will say, well, Kimberly, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to, make them feel bad. And I lay this out for them. I say, okay, you don't want to be mean. You don't want to make them feel bad. And so here they are. You have an opportunity for feedback, immediate, detailed feedback with this person face to face. And you're not willing to give that because you don't want to be mean. But then you go off here with your buddy and talk about that person. And then I highlight what's mean. Like really, which of those is mean? If I have this opportunity to tell you, hey, I need this, you messed up here, get this together, right? And then they have the opportunity to fix it versus going over here and talking about them, and they don't ever get that opportunity to fix it. So someone says something to me, it offends me, and then I go and talk about them, complain about them without giving them that opportunity to fix it. Those are signs of shame. Okay? Shame and blame. Gauzy values, and in all of our military forces, we have our core values. Right down the street at the Air Force Academy, they're listed on a wall. Here's our 3 core values. And when I go into offices, I see posters. Right? You've probably seen the poster of the eagle. going, integrity, honesty, service, like all these core values, right? But do we really live them? Do we really engage and hold each other accountable to them? So think about when you get to a new job, we have our position statement that says, here's your job, here's the meetings you go to, here's what you're going to do. That imagine if we really onboarded people with values. So basically, I'll show up to my job, and then someone says, okay, Kimberly, raise your right hand, repeat after me. I, Kimberly Dickman, will promise that I will not have a meeting after the meeting unless I've said something in that meeting, right? Like imagine what our values look like when they are enforced, lived values versus just posted on a wall with a beautiful picture. That not having concrete, accountable, feedback-based values makes for gauzy values, okay? And then perfectionism. Perfectionism absolutely goes against us being courageous. That in terms of leadership, in terms of leaders, Brené Brown, she found two actions that really show that people trust their leaders. The very first is when a leader attends funerals. And unfortunately in our military, whether it's from war accidents or death by suicide, there's opportunities for sure for leaders to do that, unfortunately. But that's one of the signs that people will share. When my boss came to the funeral of my child or came to the funeral of our coworker, it really helps to build that relationship. The second thing that in her studies found in terms of leadership is the person who will ask for help. The leader who asks for help, not the leader who looks perfect, not the leader who, I got this together, I don't need anyone, everything's great, and let me show you how busy and wonderful and amazing and effective I am. It's the leader who says, you know what, I need your help. I don't have this, I don't know how to do this, I need someone to get this done. Because it shows that one, I trust you, it helps build that trust, and the other, it shows that I am human. And so if we bounce back to these difficult conversations to say, I am human, I don't understand. I am really worried that I'm going to step in the wrong place with this conversation. I'm really worried that I am going to offend someone and maybe even risk that they're going to make a complaint, right? Like, let me lay this out here and be vulnerable to say that I am not perfect, that I want to understand, and that I'm going to take some risk in being able to understand that I want to walk the talk. And then I'll share the other side of that, the need for us as people to allow for some grace. That when someone's going to do the walk, they are going to trip. And where do we allow them to have that and learn and grow? To their face with feedback versus behind their back. Where do we come up and say, excuse me, ma'am, that was offensive this way, and let me tell you my perspective, and here's how this can be fixed, or here's what I recommend. Like, how do we do that? Because it's not easy. It absolutely can be scary, especially if you think about rank and position and so on. But the idea that being perfect really goes against courage and having these conversations. No one has this perfect. Even those of us who talk about diversity and inclusion and sexism and homophobia and all of that, we don't have it perfect. I have students correct me and ask questions about what I said and how I said it constantly. And I lay that out in front of the class to say, I will trip, I will fall, and I need you to correct me so I will learn. Which then means I need to have self-compassion because I am still learning and I'm not aware of everything. No one has this down perfect. But together, if we're willing to make these courageous cultures, then we can make an impact with that. All right, so let's do this exercise here. You have 5 sticky notes in front of you, and what I would like you to do, with a very, oh no, we have some time. We started at 1:15. Okay, I would like you to do is on those 5, separate them and put an identity that you have on each of those. So for example, you might be a son, you might be a nephew, and you have tons, so you got to pick the 5 most important. You might be a father, or your position in the military might be one of those identities that is really important to you. You might have a religion that's important. You might be Christian, you might be Muslim. You might have something that you do, like you're a soccer player or you're a tuba player, like whatever the most important identities, 5 most important identities, write that on your sticky note, please. And those in the back that are on camera, please, I know you're back there. Not fortunate that we can't have everyone in here, but please participate as well. So again, it could be role, it could be position, it could be hobby, it could be beliefs. 5 identities that are really important to you. It could be that you are a gay, Muslim, soccer player, father, sergeant. Like that might be someone's, right? Maybe you are a daughter, spouse, choir instructor. And at least for those in the room, when I see your head up, meaning that you're done, I'll go on. But we have time. Okay, so if I'm reading, most people are almost done. So now I want you to take a look at those 5 and reflect on those 5, and then you have to choose one that you give up. And not just give up on paper. I mean, you will give it up. So if it is, let's just say, and I know there's not a lot of parents in the room, but if you get rid of parent, then that means you don't have those children, you don't have that role. They were either never born or they're not here anymore, that you're going to give up that role. You have to pick one, and you have to pick it now, and you have to shred it up. And you will not be that, do that, experience that ever again. I should hear a lot of tearing. I see a lot of faces looking at me like, are you kidding? I'm not. Take it away. And you can't hide it. Don't put it under your chair. You have to tear it up. It's gone. And then reflect on that. What does that mean for you? How does that impact you? How does that change the way you operate? For some, it's like, okay, I'll give up volleyball. Yeah, I lose a hobby that I like. For others, maybe those top 5 were really, really, really critical. Like my culture, right? For me being Korean American and giving that up, and what does that mean in terms of how I operate and see myself and connections that I have in my community and so on. Okay, so you should have 4 left. And so I want you to reflect on those 4 that are left, and that I am going to magically come around. And so this is about imagination for sure, but I want you to really, really live it and think about what that would mean, that now you have to get rid of another one. You can no longer be, experience, exist in that context of whatever that is. So spouse, Buddhist, parent, church leader, whatever that role is, it's gone. You cannot do it, experience it, revisit it. It is no longer in your life or exists at all. So as you ripped up your second one, it means you have 3 left. I'm going to ask for you to yell out. Remember what you say and what you don't say in this field in terms of discrimination, racism, blaming victims, all of those topics. In terms of what you say and what you don't say really impact and make a difference. So go ahead and yell out, how was that for you to get rid of that second one? It was easy. Okay, thank you. Sorry? I don't see who's... Relief. Relief to get rid of it. Okay, thank you. You're stuck. Can you explain?
It was wife.
It was wife. Okay.
So I'm
Yeah, that's a hard one, huh? Yeah, thank you. So now you have 3 left. You need to get rid of another one. Of those 3, which would you, could you, well, it's not about could, you have to. You have to get rid of this 3rd one. You can no longer be, experience, live as, identify with. You can no longer have that, be that, do that. And because we're spread out, it's hard to see, but I saw a lot of deep breaths. Of like, okay. All right. So now you have 2 left, and I really want you to take a look at those. Look at the words you wrote down and really think about your role in that, or what you enjoy about that, or what that brings you. So you have 2 left. And then with imagination, really, really imagining that you don't have one of those, and you have to pick which one, and you have to get rid of it. You have to pick which one of those is the most important to you. So go ahead and rip up the 4th one that you'll only have 1 left. So with some honesty and vulnerability, raise your hand if you have not done that yet. Okay, a couple of you. So with both of you, if I can ask if you're willing to share, why? That they both define who you are? They both define who you are, yeah. And so pick one.
It's hard.
It is hard.
It's very hard.
It's very hard, right? It's very hard. Please, go ahead. Tell me more.
I can't choose one without the other. It's kind of really, one is religion and one is just who I am right now.
Okay. And that you can't, like, you are not who you are without both of those, right?
No.
Yeah. So pick one. So I'll let you both off the hot seat and ask others your reaction. How did that feel? What's going on? Please. Okay. For you, it was easy. Please, I would love to hear.
So,
If you'd use it, yeah, thank you.
so the reason I find it easy is because these are things that I appear to other people, like labels I achieved, like father, teacher, husband, right?
Okay.
And then I eventually got rid of everything down the ball player, and I left observer.
So the last one you have,
is observer.
observant,
Observer. So I'm the one watching.
observer. Okay. So for you, the other roles were more external labels and like how other people see you maybe, versus the one that was left is really who core you believe and know you are.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Doctor.
Someone else, please.
Yes,
Please.
I have to say, it was like a bittersweet moment because, like the 4 things I got rid of was like I didn't really want to get rid of, but
Yeah.
I had to. But the sweet thing is like that last one, that's what really makes me who I am. So basically,
Okay.
like you said, like the core. So it was like a bittersweet moment
Okay.
doing this exercise.
Would you share what your last one is if you're comfortable?
It just said that I'm a son, and
Okay.
that basically, that's the foundation of who I am. It speaks of me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine like where you come from and all that that brings with family and love and
Yes.
all of that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing, and it was said beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Someone else, please. How was that for you, that experience?
Okay, I just hate talking to
Yes,
myself.
ma'am.
So my one I have left is daughter. I had to rip up wife, sister, baker, and auntie. So those are hard because I'm really family oriented.
Yes, it
but
sounds
I
like.
can't imagine life without my mother. So, I mean, without them either. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. She's just the foundation for everything. From like he said, So I couldn't do it.
Nice. So yours was daughter, even though
Yes.
the others were hard, especially that
Yeah.
wife one, right? That's a hard one. Kind of. Okay. Okay. But really, yours was connected. And I even imagine baking is connected because you bake for others and bring people together. But yours is really connected with relationships and family, for
Yes.
sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to come back up to the front to our 2 gentlemen here and ask, did you get rid of your second one? You did. Okay. And you did? No? Okay. Okay. All right. So they did. But how difficult that would be. Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. So with that exercise, I want you to imagine. So again, we're using imagination. Imagine that as you come into your workplace, so picture what that looks like. The building you're in, you park your car, you're going to walk into your workplace, and imagine that as you walk into that workplace every day, you're asked to get rid of that identity. You're asked to get rid of that role. You're asked to get rid of that experience and who you are. That as you walk into the workplace, you cannot be and you cannot share, and people cannot know that that is a part of you. And what that might feel like. Like imagine that this is real and I cannot, whatever that is, those 4 that you ripped up, I cannot be that, I cannot show that, I cannot let people find that out about me. So imagine that my spouse is a woman and I can't have pictures of her on my desk. And what that means that every time I walk into the office, I have to get rid of that part of me, that I am not allowed to be that, experience that, and show that. And what we ask people, what are you asking people to leave at the door? To leave outside, to not bring in, that it's not important, it's not a part of you, it's not core to who you are, that we ask people to do that. So let me say that last sentence again, that we ask people to do that. So I'm not imagining anymore, but in different realms, in different workplaces, we ask people to do that. Oh, I don't see color. Oh, we treat everyone the same. We have our rank system and you promote and it's all about, the work you do and the bullets that you put on your reports and it's all pretty equal. I don't see that color. And how we ask people to leave that at the door and what that means and how that can impact us. So the exercise is not one-on-one for that discussion, but really to give you a sense of what that means when someone asks you not to bring that in here. And I know we have rules about you don't talk about politics and you don't talk about religion and so on, but when someone has to box that up and put it aside to come and be with you, to come and work with you, to come and do this incredible mission with you, how that doesn't allow for them to be free. And I use this analogy a lot, but this analogy of I have to use this hand to hold that back here because I'm not allowed to be that. I'm not allowed to show that. I'm not allowed to express that. And some of those are easy, right? Some of those are easy. It was easy to I don't bring that to work. It doesn't matter that I bake or that I play flute or whatever that is. Some of those are easy, but some of those are core to who we are. And so now I come into work, but I have to hold this back here, and now I'm operating with one hand. And sometimes that's not a big deal. I can type and send a message. I can do whatever with one hand. But sometimes it's core to who I am. That I now can't connect with you or have this conversation with you because I'm afraid this will come out or you'll know or that it'll be exposed. And how we ask people to do that. We ask them to do that all the time. And then maybe now you can see how that doesn't lead to trust, that doesn't lead to innovation, that doesn't allow for a team to develop and be close and do a mission to the extent that they can do. Because if I show that my partner is a woman, then you're going to judge. Then you're going to use that against me. Then, because you're uncomfortable, which you have a right to be uncomfortable, but then you're going to go and talk about that to someone else versus, hey, Kimberly, can I understand? I'm wondering. And how limiting that is when we don't allow people all their identities, when we judge their identities, when we put value on what's more important or what's worth more or what's allowed here. And how that impacts how we can be as humans, and that impacts how you can be as soldiers, and how you can be as leaders, and how it really, really impacts the mission when this stuff has to be held back here. Okay. So with that, I will share a couple things in terms of you as a leader, you as a soldier, and what you can do in terms of these conversations, in terms of how do we not ask people to tear that up before they come in front of me. How do we ask people not to hide that away in order to be in my presence and work with me and for me and work together? Okay. So the very first thing is about self-reflection and who you are. Really taking a look at where you stand when it comes to sexual assault, sexual harassment, race, gender, equity, bias, like really taking a self-reflection, regardless of the color of your skin, how we all need to do this. And so I'll start with Joseph Campbell. He is an anthropologist, sociologist, and he looks at his research and work has been behind kind of stories and myths of cultures. But he has become, or was, a very big advisor to many people, including George Lucas. Okay, so he was an advisor to George Lucas in Star Wars. And so you will see a lot of Campbell's work in Star Wars. If you know Campbell, you'll say, whoa, that was Campbell. And go along in the movie, you're like, whoa, there's Campbell's influence. He really influenced that movie. So in one of the scenes, you have Luke Skywalker with Yoda. And they are practicing out in the woods, right? And they're done. And then Luke is walking past or near a tree, and at the base of the tree is this cave. And so he walks by and he goes, woo, there's a lot of energy in there. And Yoda says, yes, there is. So I can't do Yoda, so just imagine, right? That's his voice. Yes, there is. The dark force is really strong. And so then Luke says, ooh, that looks kind of scary. Something like that. I'm not doing exact script, okay? But so he says, it looks scary, and Yoda says, yes, in you must go. So Luke's taken aback, but he straps on all his stuff, and he gets his lifesaver, and Yoda says, you will not need those. When you go in this cave, you will not need those, you cannot take those. And then Luke goes, yeah, right. And so he keeps his stuff on and he gets his saber and he heads into the cave. And then when he's in the cave, of course, who does he find? Darth Vader, right? So he finds Darth Vader, and they go at it. Zoom, 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 and they're doing this lightsaber fight. And then Luke goes and chops off Darth Vader's head. And his head rolls on the ground, and then he walks over, Luke walks over, and the mask opens up. And when the mask opens up, the face that he sees is his own, right? That battle that he has is with himself. That in the cave, and Yoda said, you do not need your weapons, you do not need your shields, you do not need your armor, because when you go into the cave to find the truth, it is yourself that you have to look at. And so the quote, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. It is about what is in here, in terms of bias, in terms of expectations, in terms of what we ask others to give up. It is not about them. It's not about others. It's not even about their skin color. It is about us. These horrific things are happening to people because of their history, their background, their religion, their skin color, absolutely. But it is about the people who are doing it to them. It is about what's internal to them. It is about what's internal to us. Each of us. The biases we grew up with. We were marinated in a culture that sends these messages, sometimes overt, but most of the times covert, unconscious, that we pick up these ideas and these messages about those people, that group of individuals, that religious sect, that it is these ideas. And let me add, it is experiences as well. That I grew up in this way, I have this experience, and now I internalize that as representing all of that group of people. And as I go through the world, we then gather data that supports that experience. See, I told you. Did you see that? Did you hear that in the news? That we gather that, and it builds and builds and builds that bias. That we then become blind to any exceptions to that bias. Right? That here's one example that goes against what I hold as true, my bias. Here's an example of it. I don't even see it. I'm not even aware of it. That we pick up, this is as humans, we pick up information that supports our stance. And we ignore information that doesn't support our bias. That is what we do normally. That is what I do constantly. And until I go into that cave and really take a look at what's behind the mask is me. What's behind the mask is my understanding, my lack of understanding, my education, my culture, my social media, all of those things. So again, I'm going to say, you're not going to leave here and say, oh, I got the answer. She was amazing and she told me all the answers, 1, 2, 3, and now I got this down and I can have these conversations and we're going to stop racism and sexism and victim blaming. Got it. No, what I'm saying is it is a long, hard process, but it starts with yourself. It starts with yourself really exploring, examining what's happening, where did I get this, having that battle with the saber with yourself. Yeah, it's a lightsaber, right? Yeah. I was like, am I using the right term? Yeah. So having that battle, right, with yourself to take a look and open the mask to say, here's where this comes from, why it's there, and so on. It doesn't mean we don't have others help us examine ourselves, but it starts with ourselves. So that's the first step, is that it starts with ourselves. And as we start to have these conversations, or as leaders say, hey, we need to have these conversations. We're going to have this meeting for 2 hours on Wednesday because we're going to talk about race and what's happening in the world and how does that impact us here in the military, maybe even systemically, like what happens with promotions and the criminal justice system. I know in the Air Force, we are exploring and looking at how many people get kicked out of the Air Force, what's their racial background, what's all these other things in terms of how is bias affecting the systemic system that we have in the Air Force. And so as you're asked to have these conversations, this is often what we hear. And I'll explain just quickly from Carol Dweck's work, Carol Dweck, her work on mindset. Fixed mindset means, oh no, this is all I see. It's kind of like I'm born with this is all I have. Growth mindset means that I can learn more. Okay? So the first thing often we hear is, I don't know where to start or what to say. Right? Very common. Like, what if I hurt someone's feelings? I don't know what to say, and how do I start these conversations? The growth mindset, which means you have to have courage, and I apologize, it might be a little blurry, is first I have to listen, read, and watch. Listen, read, and watch. That's the first step. You got to work on yourself. You got to be educated. You have to go get more information. And I'm going to tell you, it's not the rape survivor, it's not the person of color, it's not the black person in your office that is responsible for educating you. It is not. And I'll tell you, currently in this world, people in those positions are tired of that. To think that they are the representative of that whole group of people and it is their job to teach you is very ignorant. It is. It is on you. There is so much information in our world right now that you just Google and put in. Can white people experience prejudice? Can white people experience racism? Google it. It comes up. And then be critical consumers, because there's everything and anything out there, but take a look at what is the source. Probably the Smithsonian organization and museum on Black history in America is probably a good source, right? Probably someone on Facebook that just happens to have an opinion, maybe not a good source. But it is about reading, it's about listening, it's about educating and watching. There is so much out there. Always has been, but now there's a big spotlight on it that this is important. It's always been important. But to go and read, research, understand, work on yourself. And then to make that, I will speak against injustice. What does that mean? How do I speak it? What words? That's on you to be educated. That's on you to gather that information. I don't want to get it wrong or get called out, so let me tell you right now, you will get it wrong. When you walk, you will trip. And if you really walk, you will fall down. You will. And so I will make mistakes, no doubt about it. And I will be grateful for the lessons that I learn. That when we have a culture of perfectionism, that we cannot make a mistake, we cannot trip, then we don't learn. Like, think about the toddler who learns to walk. How many times they fall down, but they either laugh or cry, but then they get up and do it again. And yet, as adults, how we put up this barrier, it's our armor of perfection. Like, really, even just physically tripping, we get embarrassed, right? You're walking through the BX complex, or PX complex in your case. You're walking through and you trip, and then you take a look around. Did anyone see that, right? And so if we're going to have conversations about, tell me about your upbringing, or tell me about your religion, or I don't understand this, or it really goes against what I believe. And if I say the wrong thing, when I say the wrong thing, because you will, when I say the wrong thing, then I learn. Oh, okay, that means this. Some people experience it this way if I say it like that. And ooh, I better not say that. Like, we don't say that at all, right? We don't say that anymore. Okay? So yes, you will trip, you will make mistakes. It won't make a difference what I do, nothing's gonna change, right? This same thing, this same argument, the same protest, the same, like it's been for history and history and history. Different now, but the same. And so what is my one voice, what is my one conversation gonna do? That's an argument I hear quite a lot, a lot. And yet we know that things happen when we take risks and we become part of something bigger. It's one person's voice, another person's voice, another person's voice. And this is not just being fluffy and, oh, let's be idealistic. It absolutely is about a group of people making a difference. We are in a time in history when an unorganized group is bringing down big names. #MeToo. Black Lives Matter. Right? It wasn't some corporation that hired people to do this big mission. It was one person saying, here's what happened to me, here's what this man did to me, and another woman saying, me too. And another woman saying, me too. And another one saying, me too. And we can have a whole nother presentation about victims lie and victim whatever. We can have another conversation about that, but data shows most victims don't lie. But it's this unorganized group of women who came together and hashtagged this Me Too. And I'll tell you, it didn't just start a couple years ago, right? Tarana Burke decades ago started this. Black woman, amazing leader, started this. And I'll share, it was Hollywood white women who then caught on a couple years ago, and it made this huge movement. That alone is a conversation. Why, when it was a black woman leading this, did it not catch on fire until it was this? Why is it that women who are house cleaners, room service in hotels have experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual violence for decades, centuries, but decades? Why has their voice not been heard? Because most of them being minority, being lower socioeconomic class. Like having those conversations, where do you allow for that? But we know that one voice added to another voice added to another. The latest, I think, was in Oregon, this really, I think Oregon, out west somewhere, further west than us, that this big restaurant chain is down. It's done because people raising a voice because of the racist comments, racist posts, racist hiring practices of this organization. So yes, one voice can be small and quiet, but man, once you start it, someone else and someone else, it is making an impact in terms of in terms of humanity, really. I don't get involved in politics. I don't have time, and I would add in there with uniform. I'm not supposed to, at least in terms of uniform and presenting as a person. So this is about human rights. This is about human rights. It's about people who serve with you and next to you who have been assaulted by someone who's in a uniform. That's not about politics, that's not about right and wrong in terms of, what side of the fence do you stand or what side of the continuum are you on. It is absolutely about being good people and being good leaders. It's about being courageous to set up a culture that is courageous, that says we welcome whoever as long as you are going to get that mission done, as long as you help us accomplish what we need to accomplish. And along the way, it's about us being human in that process. And so with that, I'll share, very first thing is do your homework. Learn more, read more, watch more. Like if you're not into reading, there's so many great videos. One series that just started, I think it's on its third, and I am probably saying this wrong, which is awful because I've written about him, is Tough Conversations with a Black Man, right? An NFL player, ex-NFL player, Acho, does these videos quick, like 5-6 minutes. You don't have to read, but watch, learn more, do your homework. The second thing is listen and understand. The importance, it's not about you sharing what you know, it's about listening and understanding that other person. How do you really listen? And so with that, the pyramid of change, we use the Arbinger Mindset program at the Academy, and it really is about, as you see at the very top, correcting. And we'll hear leaders, and I heard some conversation in the back before I came in about, you are just going to do this, and this is how it needs to be done, and how we correct. Sometimes that has to be done, right? And sometimes that works. But even as a parent, we know that we can influence change if we go further down the pyramid. So the next piece there is to teach and communicate. That's still me to this person. Correcting is me to this person. Teaching, communicating is me to this person. But one of the biggest impacts is to listen and learn. Listen and learn about that person's world. And not listen and let me gather my argument so then I can argue back, right? Those of you who have spouses might be familiar with that. I do that, right? And I'm called on it all the time. It's like, don't just think about what you're going to say. Just listen, right? And then I have to practice that. It is active. It is hard. But listen to understand the other person's world. It helps professionally. It helps personally, for sure. I know as a parent of teenagers, older teenagers, young adults, that listen and learn is difficult, and yet it impacts relationships. It makes a change. And then we have build the relationship. Like, do you take time to build relationships at work? Which is difficult because we have things that are due now and emails and taskers, and it's constant. But where do you build that time to really connect and build a relationship with someone else? And then the final one here is build relationship with others who have influence on that person. So it's not about building relationships with colonels and generals. It's not those who have power. It's building relationships with those who have power an influence with the person that you're engaging with. So for example, with our teenagers, I have relationships with their friends. Not inappropriate, not personal, not let's hang out and party, but relationships where I can talk to them and they can talk to me because that influences my kid. And so when they go out to party and I say, hey, Mary, because my daughter's name is Tia, hey, Mary, how are you going to make sure you and Tia get home okay? Right? That influence of not lecturing, but having that relationship with their friends that influences them. And so at work, where is it that you can have some influence with this person by the other people that have influence with them as well? It's not manipulation, it's building those relationships. The further down you go, the more impact you have with change. And it is best to start at the bottom. We always start at the top. I do. With my kids, with my work, with people I supervise, let me correct this, I need this done, change this by tomorrow. But if we start at the bottom, we impact change. We understand their story. We make an impact so that when we need to correct, guess what? It's not a huge thing of me giving you direct, immediate, concrete feedback. Okay? So starting at the bottom, moving our way up, but it is about listen and learn. And so then the next piece here is to make the time and space for that, which at work is really a challenge. And I shared with a group of leaders yesterday that our boss at my work, I work at the Center for Character and Leadership Development now, that she said, okay, next Thursday we're going to get together, a 2-hour block of time, whoever wants to come in. So it was an open forum, and have a conversation about race. And then she presented right at the front, I don't have any answers. I don't know how this is going to go, and I may say things that are wrong, and this is what we're going to do. And she did not do it at lunchtime. Right? How many meetings and, oh, this is so important, so we're going to do it at lunch. And so now not only have you eaten your lunch in front of your computer, right? It's supposed to be your lunchtime, but now you have a meeting where you have to eat and get other things done on computer as well, right? Like she set up this 2-hour block of time that is critical and important enough to make a time and a space to have these conversations. And so when it's sexual assault prevention, it's not just because it's April and we're going to do this one thing and check the box to say battalion whatever did this thing because we are against rape. It is about a continual conversation where this is important enough for me to set this time to have this conversation. It is important enough for me to send people to this event when they have, let's have volunteers. And it's not, I'm going to send the person that I'm going to miss the least. Like, who can we afford to miss that day? Let's send them to that 8-hour training. It is who is the person who's going to be the most impactful and come back and make a difference. That's the commitment to these conversations and making change. And then finally, it's to ask for help. And I did talk to the leaders yesterday and saying that it might mean putting some money behind what you're saying is important. There are people who are experts in this field of race, inclusion, diversity, who are experts in the field of sexual assault prevention, who are experts, and not saying your local folks aren't, your SHARP people are absolutely experts in that, so where do you give a time and space for them? But in supporting them, is there some kind of money or funds or commitment that you need to make to be able to say this is important, that this conversation is going to happen not just with 10 volunteers, but with everybody. And that conversation during PT, who's having that conversation, who's making that space, who can you bring in, or how do you get educated that you can bring that in? Then you as parents, for the few of you who are parents, how do you have that conversation at home? And it's not just the one time, oh, this blew up in the news, let me have this conversation. It's a continual process of learning, educating yours and yourself.
So what is leadership, Mr. Elrod? Someone who trains. Okay? That's being a leader, that you're training. What else? What else is leadership? This is going to be our working definition for the next hour. Someone who's present. Tell me a little bit more about that, Ms. Kennison.
Like someone who isn't there when they have to
Someone who is there for you, someone who is there in the moment. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. Okay. That sounds very genuine to me. Is that what I'm hearing from you? Is it okay if I put that? Okay. All right, what else? What else is leadership? Lead by example. Okay, that's a buzz phrase that we hear all the time, right? What does that mean to you? Doing the right thing. And I'm going to put under that what you said, which was lead by example. Okay. Do you want to add anything else to that? All right. What else? What else does it mean? What does leadership mean? What does it mean to you? Because I guarantee you, every answer you give me for the next now 55 minutes, I'm not going to ask you whether or not it's right or wrong. I'm going to ask you, is it reflective of what you just told me leadership is? So do you have anything you want to add to this?
I would say someone who guides others to a common goal.
Guides others to a common goal. So I want you to think about this as we're putting this together, as we're putting this working definition for you together. How many of you have had leaders that you did not respect? Raise your hand. Really, only like half of us? How many of you have had leaders that you have really respected? How would you describe them? This is what we're looking for. And if you're going to tell me right now, then that this is everything that would describe them, then we'll move on. There's no other qualities that you can think of that would fall into that. Mr. Ishmael? Selfless. Okay. What else?
Defense.
What? Defense. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by that.
Taking up for somebody.
Standing up for somebody, okay? I'm going to put that next to doing the right thing. By the way, when you're thinking about your examples, when I asked you earlier about did you ever have a leader that you just didn't have confidence in, didn't like, or did you ever have a leader that you really liked, trusted, etc.? Don't limit yourself to the Army. Have you had, Mr. Shriver, have you had leaders other than being in the Army?
Yeah.
Where?
My dad.
All right, just your dad? Was there anybody else? Coaches, teachers? I guess coaches? Yeah. Okay. What kind of qualities did they have? Just this? That was it? Okay. Weren't afraid to lead. They were brave. Is that what I'm hearing? Brave? What else? They were caring. I'm going to put this next to that genuine thing. What else? Knowledgeable. They were knowledgeable. What else? They were respectful. They were respectful of you as a person. They may have told you something that you didn't like, but they didn't call you a dirtbag, right? What else? Okay. Anybody else? These were all the qualities in the leaders that you truly respected, admired, that you really felt were leaders. That's what I'm hearing. Right? All right, Mr. Shriver, come here. Come here. Go stick this right on that side of that podium, please, so we have that for later. So that's going to be our working model, right, as far as what we consider leadership to be. So my question to you next is this. You've heard these words, right? Counsel, coaching and mentoring. You've probably heard those. What's the difference? Coaching is physical. Well, it could be. It certainly could be. And mentoring is more psychological. Okay. Who would you describe as a mentor in your life? You had a really good example. Your dad was a mentor in your life. Right? That mentor turned around and led by example, did all those things, and probably some more, and you learned from them how? I just gave it to you. Primarily by seeing what they did. Correct? And mentors generally will answer your questions when you come to them. Versus when you are coaching, right? Who's ever done sports, had a coach, something like that? Describe to me what the coach would do. He would push you.
Direction. He wants you to go where you think you'd be the best. And I mean, I'd say coach is also a mentor, just because that's my experience with coaching.
And absolutely, coach. Somebody like a coach who is coaching you, who is directing you, who is instructing you, can absolutely be a mentor, and a mentor can coach you. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about communication for leaders. These are the things that you're doing, right? You're teaching. You're teaching folks. You're guiding folks. Into whatever it is that you want them to be. What do you do in the military? You're a fueler. Whether or not you're coaching somebody how to be a better fueler or how to do fueling, or whether or not you're mentoring them to be somebody who is all of this. Right? So let's talk about how we start this conversation off when you have to have an interaction with somebody. Depends on what it is. Is this true? She says yes. It depends on what it is. I would postulate that there is a universal way in which you start an interaction if I want you to get something out of it and if I'm going to follow all of your principles. Right? I may or may not have to be approachable, but you have to have confidence in me, right? You have to have confidence in my competency. Plus, how many of you have had that interaction where somebody starts off with, "What are you doing?" What immediately happens to you? How many of you have had that interaction? Every one of you that has been through basic training should probably raise your hands at some point. What was your immediate response? That dude's an a-hole, right? So there's a really simple formula on how you teach somebody when you are interacting with them. And this is really universal. And there's all different kind of versions of this, but I'm going to give you a very simple one. All right? First thing I should do. Praise or empathy. I'm immediately going to get your attention. You are not going to shut down. Now, when I say praise, what if somebody's doing something wrong? What if they're doing something that is absolutely incorrect or possibly dangerous? Do I have to praise you for doing something? What if you're drinking and driving? Dude, good job on those shots. But this is praise or empathy. Hey, I know you really like knocking down the beers because, who doesn't like a beer, right? That's an empathy statement. That's letting the other person understand that this behavior right here, or what you're doing, I'm not saying that you are a screw up. I'm not saying you're a jerk. There has never been any research, anything else that says devaluing somebody, humiliating somebody gets you any results. Telling you you're a screw up, or you can't ever do anything right, aside from the fact that it's an incorrect statement, is not going to get you what you want, which is to be able to do those things. So, praise or empathy statement. What's the next thing you got to do? Isn't there some kind of behavior that you are either attempting to correct or maybe encourage? And we'll get to the encourage part later. But if you are doing these things and you're trying to be knowledgeable and you're trying to train, because that was the very first thing you said, train, right? So the first thing you have to do, or the next thing you have to do rather, is describe. The behavior, the action, the item. You can't say, Mr. Stoltz, you're just an F-up. Well, what is that? You have to describe what the inappropriate behavior is. And then, believe it or not, you have to give some kind of rationale. Now, you're all fairly young. I say fairly young because I'm older than dirt. But you probably heard this at some point, possibly from your parents, and usually it's when they get really frustrated. How many of you are, anybody here parents, by the way? No? Hey, you will probably say this at some point when you were parents. Because I said so. Right? You've heard that at some point, right, Mr. Elrod? So that really doesn't tell you anything. That doesn't explain to you why drinking and driving is bad. That doesn't explain why mishandling fuel is bad or dangerous or wrong. But give them a rationale. Explain to them. So what you're doing isn't the correct way of doing it because you could hurt yourself. It's a violation of the regulations. It's not effective. So now that I've done this, I've gotten your attention. We've actually described what it is that we're trying to change. And I've given you a rationale as to what it is that I need you to do. Or actually, why it is that behavior, that action is not appropriate. I apologize. This is a work phone. And it just hung up, so we're good. I'm not bilingual. I don't speak iPhone, so I'm not really sure how this works. All right. So now that I've done all that, what do you think is the next thing we got to do? What? Absolutely. What Ms. Kennison said was, first I have to describe the appropriate behavior. This is what I want out of you, right? What's right? What is it that I want from you? This is how I want you to do it. This is how I need you to do it. Now, you could stop there. By the way, how long those of you that are sitting there thinking, dude, I don't have time to be doing all this. How long do you think just those 4 steps takes you? What? 10 minutes?
Like less than 5 minutes.
Less than 5 minutes? This is actually all part of what we call a 9-point teaching interaction. You can do this in like 30 seconds. This is not all this hard. And if you don't believe me, just practice it. I know you really wanted to get to lunch early because you got a lot of stuff to do. I have a lot of stuff to do today as well. But when you jump in line in front of others, it really causes a lot of strife with everybody that's waiting in line in front of you. And so what I really need you to do is just wait in line where you started from. Anybody time that? I think I was probably less than like 7 seconds, right? And that was just going through these. So describe it, pull out everything that I just did. Mr. Solomon, walk me through it. What was my praise or empathy statement?
Your praise or empathy statement was the praise. I forget what was the praise, but empathy was
I'm not going to praise her for jumping ahead in line, right? So the empathy statement was, hey, I know you're in a hurry, and you got a lot of stuff to do. I got a lot of stuff to do as well. And what was the inappropriate behavior, Mr. Elrod? Was the behavior I wanted to change? What was the behavior that I wanted to change? To her, yes. Just now.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, The statement that I made to her, right? Hey, I know you're really in a hurry. I'm in a hurry too, because we both have a lot of stuff to do. But when you jump in front of line in front of everybody, it really causes a lot of strife, and people feel like they're not being valued in anything. And so what I really need you to do is just go back to where you started from. When you jump in front of the line, that's the behavior I want to change, right? What was the rationale, Mr. Schriever? Causes a lot of problems. How do you feel when people jump in front of you in line in the chow hall?
Or anywhere
Mad, okay. Right? And I described the appropriate behavior, or what I needed that person to do. Okay? Absolutely. Now you could actually take this further. So now that I've got their attention, I've described what I want to change, I've explained why we need to change it, I've explained what I need from you, what do you think would be the next thing to do? We're going to get to that. What do I want to encourage? Okay, how do we encourage, why would I encourage me explaining that?
Well, and how it benefits them to do the correct thing.
I did. I gave the rationale. We did that third thing. That's the rationale. Right? Now I've explained to you what I need. You're on the right track. You're very much on the right track. Because the next thing we want to do is practice. Here's what I need you to do. This is probably something you're going to do more often when you're doing that coaching. When you're doing that more formalized coaching of, I need to, no. I know it really seems like that would be the right way to fire your weapon, but really, it's not, because you're going to not, you're not going to hit the target, and we're going to end up being here all day. And so what I really need you to do is focus on this, line the sights up like this. All right. So go ahead and show me you doing this. Go ahead and line up the sights. Take a couple of shots. That's practicing. By the way, again, how fast did I do that in? And then, if they have done it correctly, we're not even going to, by the way, we don't even need to get to all the 9 steps. We need to put in a 3.5 here, or excuse me, a 2.5. Because sometimes when you do something inappropriate, what is there? There is some kind of consequence. So sometimes there needs to be a consequence for things, and that's where we would apply it, after we've described what it is that's inappropriate. So praise, describe, consequence, rationale, what's right, practice, and then, after they've practiced it, what do? What? No, what'd you say? Encouragement, praise. We're back to that praise, right? We're back to that praise. We don't even have to go all through 9 steps. This is the fastest way, literally, to be able to communicate with somebody and do exactly that. Now let me ask you this. If my interaction with you follows these basic steps, have I just followed what you've told me is leadership? What do you think? I mean, you tell me. I want to know if I'm on the right track with you. What do you think, Mr. Sanchez? Yes? Say that again.
You aren't afraid to go to that person and say, hey, can you go back to your spot and not tell everybody?
So let's move on to that, because now we got this down. Now we got what we're going to do. And by the way, if we have time today, we'll actually practice this. But I encourage you, take a snapshot, take notes. Anybody still take notes? You still write stuff down? Or do you just always take pictures of it? Yeah, okay. Take a picture of it. Go back and practice this. By the way, share this with folks that have kids. Guarantee you, it will change their world. Practice this with the people that you lead. Practice this with each other. It will feel awkward. It will feel awkward until you do what? Practice it. Every new skill you've ever done, every new skill you've ever learned was a little bit awkward at first, was a little bit slow at first, until you practiced it. And then once you practice it and get it down, it'll roll off the tongue like that. And by the way, a side benefit of this is when you know every interaction between you and I is going to involve this, what are you more likely to do? What? Respect me, right? And probably be a little bit more cautious in what you do. Because how many of you want to sit down and have this conversation? Stand up and have this conversation. You know it's coming, right? But realistically, yes, this is that teaching. When we are mentoring, when we are coaching, when we are being a leader and we're training, that's what we're doing is we're teaching. Okay? How many of you have heard the phrase teaching moment? One, right? By the way, this goes much faster if we interact with each other. And when you hear that teaching moment, what did that kind of mean to you? In the context that it was used when you heard it. You learned something, right? And that's really what you're doing, okay? Matter of fact, according to you, that was the very first thing you said when we talked about leadership, is training. What is training? Training is teaching, right? Learning something new or practicing something. So this works really well. And we will go put this over on that wall over there, underneath the mountain posts. Thank you. Appreciate that a lot. No. I know it seemed when I said over there that you probably thought I meant over there, but nobody can see that. And so what I need you to do is put it under the mountain post sign so that everybody can see it. Thank you very much. All right. You're laughing, so describe my teaching interaction. What just happened? Did I follow that? Did I give a praise or empathy statement? What was it?
It was, you said, I know I said this.
I know you think I said that over there, right? And I appreciate that.
But this is what I want.
But nobody can see it over there. So now we have a rationale, right? And what I need you to do is this, okay? So it's really simple. It really is. But let's talk about some of the different types of when we think about how we approach this. And you can implement this in any of these. Now, there's different styles of leaders, right? So let's think about this for just a minute. I have to put my glasses on so I make sure I get the spelling correct. So realistically, it comes down to this. And I have to make sure I get the order right. So really, you have directing, coaching, supporting, and delegating. And really, this kind of depends on who you're working with. If you're dealing with somebody that absolutely has no knowledge, you generally need to be more directing. You need more. They might be really enthusiastic about doing a good job, but they have no competency. They have no knowledge as to what it is that you're actually asking them to do. It's, think about you going into a new job, new terminology, new equipment, something you've never seen before. And you might be really, really enthusiastic about it, but you don't have any knowledge of it. So you need more, you need a higher level of direction. Coaching, person probably has a little bit of knowledge, understanding what to do, but maybe they don't have the finesse. And so then it comes back to your coaching, your fine-tuning. And then you have supporting. They have a fairly good knowledge, and they have a lot of enthusiasm. And we're at that mentoring stage where it's like, you know what you're doing. You just, maybe you feel you don't know what you're doing, but you've done this, 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 and this, and you've done it well. All the way down to delegating, where you have confidence in that person's abilities, they have knowledge of what it is, and they have confidence in their abilities. And that's when it becomes great for your communication. Because then it's just a matter of, here is what I need, go. Because you've developed that relationship of, I understand that you have knowledge, I have confidence in your knowledge, but when I delegate, when I say, Mr. Elrod, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go with these folks and go get some chairs and set them up. And set them up so that everybody has 6 feet distance. Can he still come to me with a question? Yes. Wait, where did you say the chairs were? Behind the curtain. That's delegating. And again, when folks have little knowledge, and probably a high enthusiasm, all the way down to where they have good knowledge, they have good enthusiasm, you have confidence in them. This is the different styles of interactions that you're going to have. Right? Now let's talk a little bit about, as we keep this in mind, the last thing I want to talk about, actually, let's see, Mr. Elrod, would you go put this under the support? Under support, under the big support sign. Thank you. So let's talk about conflict. What is conflict? Mr. Bo? Is it Ball?
Disagreement between two parties.
Disagreement, okay. I had a disagreement between me and my Jeep this weekend. I wanted it to go someplace that it didn't want to go. Is that a conflict? What else is a conflict? That's it? That's all we're going to call conflict? Doesn't approve of what you're saying. Now, when you're dealing with things like opinions, what's the difference between right and wrong?
Opinions are differing.
Opinions are opinions, right? So, I want you to think about these different ways in which we generally handle conflict, okay? And this is going to be very important in your interactions with folks. So, we tend to do things like avoid. How many of you don't like conflict? You don't like conflict? Like when you know you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you put it off. Like, maybe it'll work itself out. Is that you? Yeah? Anybody else? Hey. Why do you not like conflict?
I would say because being in the Army, it really comes down to your rank. Like, if you're a private and the staff sergeant and you're all having a conflict, it doesn't matter if you're right.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. So what do you have control over in that interaction?
Your opinion. Yeah, your opinion, the way you handle yourself.
Your behaviors, right? Your behaviors. But what about when you outrank the other person and you have a conflict with them?
You have control over everything pretty much.
You have control over a lot, not everything. What do you not have control over?
Their behavior.
Their behavior, their response. Okay? But even when you outrank them, do you sometimes avoid the conflict? Yeah. Okay. So there's avoidance. There's what we call domination. If I can spell it correctly, there we go. There's what we call accommodation. Compromise. And consensus. Those are all different conflict, ways we handle conflict. Okay, whether it's trying to correct somebody's behavior, give somebody guidance. Sometimes mentoring somebody is one of the hardest conversations to have because you may or may not agree with what they're doing. I don't agree if parents spank their kids. I don't think you should spank your kids. I think the research on corporal punishments, like 50 years worth saying it just doesn't work. There are better ways. But I know, first off, it's not illegal. You can't abuse them. But if he doesn't want to do it differently, because his opinion is, I was spanked as a kid, I grew up okay, it's okay for me to spank my kids, I can offer him different options, but I am not going to be able to use this one right here and say, no, you will not spank your kids. I can sit there and tell you, degrading Mr. Solomon for doing a bad job is not going to get me anything. I don't care what you say. There's never been any proof that degrading somebody, smoking somebody, beating the hell out of somebody actually gets a different behavior. If that was the case, once we said, okay, we have the death penalty, nobody would break any laws, right? Right? Because, I'm threatening you with pretty extreme physical violence at that point, right? Do people still commit crimes? Yes, among many other things. Accommodation. Now, by the way, any of these different ways in which we handle conflict, we can take to the extreme. And when we take them to the extreme, we don't get anywhere, for the most part, except for one. Okay? Domination. Accommodation. Often, it's like that's when you want to allow somebody space, allow somebody distance. You keep backing up your line. You want to accommodate them. What do you get out of that? Nothing. You don't get anything out of that, right? You're just accommodating them. And so really, it's almost like you're avoiding the conflict. You just keep coming back to it. You might be addressing it, but you just keep giving them whatever it is they need. And then compromise. Huh? I get enough to consider it a win, and you get enough to consider it a win. I might not get everything that I want, but I get enough. It might not 100% resolve the conflict. I'm selling a car for $4,000. You don't want to pay $4,000, but you really want that car. I really want to sell my car, and I want $4,000. We settle on $3,200, $3,299.65. Right? Now, you really didn't want to pay that. You didn't want to pay over $3,000. So you paid more than $3,000, right? But did you pay $4,000? No. Did you get the car that you wanted? Yes. I really wanted $4,000, but I really wanted to sell my car. So I got enough money, and I sold my car. That's a compromise. Right? By the way, that was a conflict. We had a conflict, we compromised on it, and we use these big words in describing what we're doing, but we do this all the time. When you really think about how you address things and how you communicate, when it comes to things like conflict within a communication, we generally fall into these things. And we tend to do these things more often than not. We usually have like one or two of these that we tend to do more often, tend to avoid conflict a little bit more often when we can, except when we absolutely have to. And often when we avoid it, when we tend to avoid conflict, when we do have to do conflict, we usually end up with that accommodation. Right? And then we have consensus. What's consensus? You don't know what consensus means?
I feel like it's kind of like, yeah, we both have different opinions or like different ideas of whatever it is the conflict is about, but we still were able to like come to an agreement and be okay with it at the end.
So we have different opinions, we have different ways in which we think this should be settled, but we're able to come to some kind of agreement. It's very close to compromising. Right? I may not agree with everything. Right? I don't think you should spank your kids, but we have a consensus that you should not beat them. Right? It is not, a consensus is not, everybody agrees. It's everybody agrees enough. Because you might not 100% agree. All right. Let's see. Let's put this next to that one over there under the mountain post on that side. Thank you. All right. Let me just make sure we get everything down. We got about 10 minutes. Okay. I want you to consider the following. When we're talking about coaching and when we're talking about leadership, generally we're talking about doing this with soldiers. When we're talking about communicating with other soldiers, right? Right? How many of you have other soldiers that you are in charge of? Nobody's in charge of anybody else. You're in charge of, how many people are you in charge of?
One.
Just one? Right? What do you know about that individual?
Young, stubborn,
They're young and they're stubborn, okay.
but
By the way, if I say they're young, what is that? They're what? That's, I'm describing something about them, that they are, they're 19, right? By the way, you're all young to me, okay? Matter of fact, I think everybody in the audience is probably young to me. So that's kind of subjective. You hear that all the time. I hear young sergeants sit there and say, "Oh man, these kids," and I'm sitting there looking at this, this young sergeant that's like 22 years old, and I'm like, all right. But then he said he used something else to describe him. And what was that? He's stubborn. If I say you're stubborn, first off, what? How are our interactions going to follow after that? Yeah, you're going to be like, well, screw you, right? But when I say, what do you know about this individual? What do you know about them?
but I know he works hard, but you gotta like push him though. You gotta like, let's go, let's do this, let's get this done. You gotta like, be there for him, for his work.
Okay, so you got to be there for him, et cetera, et cetera. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a secret in building a relationship with the people that you need to communicate with. Because relationship is what's going to allow you to do that. It's what's going to make your conflict style work for you. It's going to build connection. Mr. Sanchez, right? What's your first name?
Isidoro,
What?
Isidoro,
Isidoro? Strange. Where are you from?
Oklahoma,
Oklahoma. What part?
Broken Bow,
What?
Broken Bow.
Oh, Broken Bow. Okay. Right. And you have your family's all there, right? And so let me. Is this your first duty station?
My second.
Your second. Where was your first duty station at?
Riley.
Fort Riley. Right. And are you in a relationship? You looking for a relationship? You're married. Right. You have kids? No. Do you live on post or off post? On post. Right. And is your wife also from Broken Bow? Good. How long have you guys been married?
A year.
A year. So, pretty new, right? And do you drive? What do you drive?
Ford F-150.
So do you like lift it, all of that stuff, or just standard? Okay. All right. All right. What do I know about him? What? Really? I know more than whether or not he's knowledgeable or stubborn, right? I know his first name. I know where he's from. Give me another 30 seconds, I would have found out if he had any siblings. When I ask you, what do you know about somebody that you lead? That's what I mean. Don't try and profile them for me. That's not building a connection. That's not building a relationship. And you do this all the time. This is not new for you. Do you, Mr. Shriver, do you have any friends?
Yeah.
You have friends, right? How did you make friends?
Finding out what
Dude, you're going to be my friend.
finding out what they like compared to what I like.
Yeah, you found out about them, right? That's building a relationship. Are you married?
Yes.
Right? How did you two decide to get married? Did you just, hey, let's get married? I'm going to have benefits. It'll be cool. You'll get insurance. Is that it? No. What'd you do? You connected with each other. You built a relationship. And when you build that relationship, Yeah, you do all of these things. You become genuine. You're obviously here for them. You're in that moment. You're doing the things that you're sitting there saying leadership is. See, when we say communication, communication isn't just about, dude, do this. How do I do this as a leader? Well, I'm supposed to be in charge. No. First off, leaders can be anybody. Leaders do not have to be attached to rank. That can be one definition of it. I've known a lot of people, and you have too, where you stand in formation and somebody is talking to you that outranks you that you don't respect. And you don't respect them because you don't feel they're a leader. Because they don't fit your definition. And so I challenge you in your interactions with people, if you want to be a leader, use your definition. And the very first thing you said was, leadership means training. Well, if you want to train them, that's actually teaching. These are not they're not difficult concepts. They're really not. They might be slow to pick up or slow to practice on, but that's because you have to practice it. Anybody here have a hobby? Something you like doing? What do you like doing? Playing video games, right? You know, you get a new video game, what do you do like for the first 20 minutes? Go through the tutorial, right? And then for the next hour, what do? Die a lot, right? Yeah, because you are learning and you practice and you repeat, okay? That's what you want to do. Because ultimately what it comes down to is this. When you have to do it in the moment, when it's critical, you want it to be comfortable to you. You want it to be natural to you, okay? And the only way it's going to be that is just like everything else they tell you in the Army. They want you to have all of these skills that are reactionary, right? So that, you know, when somebody is shooting at you, when there's an explosion going around you, you just do it, right? You hear that all the time. This is the same thing. All right. So I've given you a lot. I encourage you. Normally what I would do is I would break you up into groups and we would kind of practice some of these things. But what I would really like you to do is go home, try using some of these skills, try practicing them. Okay? I promise you, any interaction that you have, any conflict that you have, when you start off with that praise or empathy statement, you absolutely will get further in that interaction. But remember, praise or empathy statement, I got to describe exactly what it is that I want you to change. I may have to apply a consequence. Now I know you really wanted to do it this way, but since you did, now we're going to have to stay late to do it correctly. Because if we don't torque the tires down the way they're supposed to, somebody could, the tire could fall off and it could kill somebody. So here's how we need to actually do it. All right. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Shriver's like, no, I'm good. I just want to go. Any questions? All right, good. In that case, we're going to go around. I am going to ask each of you, what is an important concept you took out of today?
I learned how to be a leader.
How to be a leader. Describe that a little bit more.
How to train people.
Okay.
How to converse with them.
Okay.
Starting off with a praise.
All right.
And then,
You can take everybody else's. Mr. Stoltz?
I would say I learned all the good attributes about leaders and how many attributes you don't see in leaders today, but how many I feel like everyone should abide by.
That what should be leadership for you is what I'm hearing.
Correct.
Okay? Mr. Bo?
Learned today that there's a right way and wrong way to tell people like they've done something wrong, and this is the way you need to correct it.
Okay? And I would put forth less right and wrong and more effective versus not effective. Right? How many of you like getting a deal when you go to the store? Really? How many of you like a deal when you go to the store? Right? Yeah, you like to get more, more for your buck, right? That's what we're talking about. More bang for your buck. Miss Aguayo? Yes. Praise people. Praise or empathy. Doesn't necessarily have to be praise, but praise or empathy. Ms. Kennison?
Conflict doesn't necessarily have to be like an intense interaction.
Conflict does not have to be a bad thing. Right? And it's a very healthy thing. And it's actually a very natural part of a relationship. Yes, Ms. Solomon.
Find the best intentions for both sides.
Try and find the best intentions of both sides. Maybe we don't get everything that we want, but can we get enough?
Better way to approach conflict.
A better way to approach conflict other than avoiding it. Because what does avoiding get you? It's okay to avoid sometimes, right? But if you do it all the time, Mr. Sanchez?
You said right now, like when someone asks you about someone, like say what you know about the person, not to like make it seem as bad as it is.
Judgments, being judgmental. Yes. Mr. Shriver?
Like an effective way of teaching somebody.
An effective way of teaching somebody. Mr. Frias, sorry.
Connecting with somebody.
Connecting, making that connection, building that relationship. Right. All right, I appreciate your time today. I'm going to turn this back over to Sergeant Oxford. And thank you very much. You always have a great day.